Hello, and this short video is going to be a follow-up to another video that I made called X Woke Manifesto, and also something I published called the X Feminist Manifesto. So this will be like a third installment in the series in which I try to, question and say what I really think about, liberal identity politics, intersectionality theory, and wokeism, which are basically three variables of something called post-positivism. And post-positivism emerged in the 1990s as sort of like Enlightenment liberalism put through the laundromat of postmodernism, and you get like a new liberalism, which is liberal identity politics. So the new liberalism, is to like divide people into categories and then assign sort of like essential qualities to them, and then people in those categories are required to like perform a narrative based on that in order to be authentic, right? So authenticity means adopting a narrative that is artificially manufactured by liberal theorists that you're supposed to be, right, as opposed to who you are. But and so first of all, and I've been posting on this about this on X and on Threads, and I've got a lot of flack. So I want to like reply in a concise way in a video. So first of all, on the issue of race, I just want to make very clear, I am skeptical as to, propositions that there is some sort of essential quality to the concept of race. Okay, classifying people into races was invented by the British in the 1700s. Okay, that system of racial classification, and then assigning essential qualities to these racial categories, that was invented also by the British, and those qualities were based on stereotypes and lies or misinterpretations, based on the pure subjectivity of British explorers or whatever, So it was a sort of like an ideology. Race became the ideology, the operating ideology of the British Empire, basically. So that's where race comes from. The modern concept of race comes from that, this sort of arbitrary system of classification they created. And when the British invented the concept of race in the 1700s, what they did is they took like features, so-called ethnic features, that are the result of climatological and adaptations to terrain that evolved over millions of years, hundreds of thousands of years. They took that and they assigned to those features essential qualities. So, for example, if I have a slanted eyes, I'm supposed to be, this or that. If I am, if I have a, I don't know, if I look at a certain type of African, I'm preconditioned to be criminal or whatever, like they did with the Irish, right? The Irish race was supposed to be, uh, you know, predisposed towards criminality, right? For example, uh, you know, um, people with blue eyes had better vision than people with brown eyes. That was another one. The Hitlerite regime used this, measuring skulls and whatever, um, to determine whether a person was a pure Aryan or not. The word Aryan, the word Nordic was coined in the 1890s by the Full Society. The concept of the Aryan race with a Y, Aryan with a Y, was also developed in the 1890s mostly. So it was in the 17 and 1800s that they developed these concepts of race. So when you look at critical race theory, which is supposed to be progressive, it is actually premised upon the same foundations as you know Hitlerite race theory. So Hitlerite race theory is the mirror image of critical race theory. For that reason, you see, Malcolm X and Hitler are the mirror image of each other, right? Except that towards the end, Malcolm X, when he visited Mecca, realized that he had been mistaken and he changed, and that's why he got assassinated by Nation of Islam, because um, Elijah Muhammad was the mirror image of Hitler, you know. So yeah, so that's my view. My view on critical race theory and the issue of race is basically that, critical race theory and Hitlerite race theory are the mirror image of each other. They're both based on the same premises. And it's completely legitimate to say that a person, just because I have certain ethnic features that I'm supposed to be essentially this or that. I reject that completely. So this idea that just because I have certain ethnic features that I belong to this or that culture or cultural narrative or whatever, cultural narratives are historically constructed, political and historically constructed. The concept of race is historically and politically constructed. All that. Like I consider myself a culturally autonomous individual. Okay, I am ethnically, culturally, and racially autonomous. That's what I say. I am an individual, culturally, ethnically, and racially autonomous individual. I don't belong to any ethnicity. I don't belong to any culture, and I don't belong to any race. And that's the end of it. That's me. Okay, and I defend that. And I will never be allow myself to be classified into some sort of essentialist classification system like I am some sort of rat. I'm not going to allow some critical race theorist or some Hitlerite fanatic is going to classify me into some race, and I won't allow it. I don't agree. I won't acknowledge it. So neither Hitler nor critical race theory, neither or. Okay, the Aryan race is a myth. The Aryan race with a Y is a myth. The same as the sort of like the idea of the African American has essential qualities like ebonics and whatever. That's also a myth. Each person is a unique individual, whether they have regardless of the level of melatonin in their skin. So, and yeah, they say that Africans are that people in Africa are essentially tribalistic. I've met many Africans in Norway and Sweden who are not that way, who are individualists. Yeah, so gender is the same thing. The idea of gender, the idea of gender is really problematic because the fact that you have a certain set of genitals does not carry with it any sort of essential, anything essential to it. I mean, so that I have a penis does not imply that I have to do this or that, or that I'm required to be a breadwinner or a soldier or whatever. I'm not required to do any of those things. I can do whatever I want. And also that I have a penis does not require I can only insert that penis in a vagina. That's not really that you have a penis does not mean that you have to do this or that with it. You can choose to insert it in a vagina or not. Or you can, yeah, and it's fine. It doesn't make any difference. From the perspective of nature, a penis has only two purposes, and that's it. Everything else is politically and culturally constructed. So the notion of gender to me is completely irrelevant. I don't care about gender at all. I ignore gender. It doesn't exist. Gender is a myth. This idea that there is some sort of essential characteristics assigned to, that women are essentially this, that people who are born with a vagina are essentially, whatever, are required. All that is politically and culturally constructed. So the way I see it is there are two types. There are just people, and some people have a penis, some people have a vagina, and lately anybody can get a pair of tits. In Fort Lauderdale. In Fort Lauderdale, you can just there is this clinic. You can get a pair of tits, $99 a tit, and they don't even. And the way they do the silicone, they just do like a little dot, and they inflate. If you want to get a pair of tits, it's $99 a tit in this clinic in Broward County, Fort Lauderdale. Anybody can have a pair of tits, and you can take it back. They can take it back out. They can take the silicone out too. And if you want to take the tits off, you can. If you want to get a pair of tits, $99 a tit. Get a pair of tits for a while and then take it back. Yeah, you can do that. I mean, having a pair of tits carries absolutely no significance anymore. Anybody can have a pair of tits. Anybody. I've had a pair of tits once, and I took them off. I mean, whatever. You don't. Yeah. So having a pair of tits has absolutely no significance whatsoever. Any sort of intrinsic, essential significance to it doesn't mean anything. So this is why the concept of gender is just completely irrelevant. It's the same as the concept of race. I don't, I, you know, I am very, very skeptical that race and gender exist. Extremely skeptical. So, uh, then there's this whole issue. Oh yeah, the Native Americans. It's another issue. I got into. I got a lot of flack for that on X because there are no Native Americans. There are no natives in the Americas. Nobody is native to the Americas. Nobody, because the ancestors of the native so-called Native Americans came into North America and from Asia in three waves. You know, before the Ice Age, you know, and after the Ice Age, there were like three waves of people. So from Asiatics from Siberia or whatever are the ancestors of Native Americans, so-called Native Americans. So during the Ice Age, some people got bottled up in the Americas, and because eventually these people developed, uh, climatological and terrain adaptations, which produce the features of, the red race or whatever. The Native Americans look that way because they evolved that, their Asiatic ancestors adapted to the terrain and climate of the Americas. So then they look the way they look, but that there is nothing essential to that or whatever. It's simply an evolutionary process that happened as a result of adaptation to terrain and climate, and that's it. That's it. There is nothing essential to it, and everything else was constructed historically, politically, culturally. You know, So, and each individual who descends from the so-called Native Americans or who is a Native American is free to choose to follow to perform that narrative or not. um, a so-called Native American could do the same thing. They could choose to not perform the narrative of the Native American or the red man or whatever. They could choose to not do that and just be themselves. You know, we're always free to choose as individuals whether we want to, perform a particular, racial, gender, or I don't know, identity narrative that is defined by, again, this is post-positivist theory. Post-positive theory, that and another aspect of post-positive theory is, visualize your oppression. So you sit down and you visualize. First of all, you acknowledge your identity, and then you visualize your oppression in relation to that identity. So let's say that I am, I don't know, a Native American, a so-called Native American. So, according to post-positivism, the first step is to acknowledge I am a Native American, right? In other words, you adopt this historically and politically constructed narrative of the Native American, and you make it your own, right? You stop being yourself and you become that narrative. And then once you become this narrative, then you start visualizing your oppression as a member of this narrative that you adopted. You visualize your oppression, and then you articulate, a narrative of oppression and liberation, and then that becomes legitimated by the fact. That's how liberal identity politics works. Liberal identity politics divides humanity into like a classification system with limited choices, and then you have to choose which narrative to perform. Or no, you are assigned a narrative depending on your ethnic features, or if you have a penis, or if you have, the level of melatonin in your skin, whether you have slanted eyes or not. You're classified into a peg hole, and then you're required to perform that narrative, or else you are an Uncle Tom, or somebody who has internalized their oppression and refuses to acknowledge it, or whatever. Because I'm required to agree with liberal identity politics. I'm required to agree that race exists. I'm required to agree that gender exists. I'm required to agree with essentialism. I'm required to agree that Native Americans are native. I'm required to agree to. I'm required, and if I don't, then I'm not respectful, and I am a racist, and I am a sexist. That's the problem. That's liberal identity politics. It's a system of compulsion, coercion, intellectual suppression that you're required to, participate in and perform a narrative about. So, yeah, I am a, I am anti-post-positivist. I reject the premises of post-positivism. I reject the premise that race exists. I reject the premise that gender exists. I reject the premise that Native Americans are native to the Americas. I reject the premise that there are natives in the Americas. Nobody in the Americas is a native. Nobody. Nobody in that continent, in those continents, north, center, and south, is a native of anywhere. Because everybody in that continent is a descendant of a migrant at some point. Everybody. And you could say the same thing about Europe. If you look at the history of Europe, all the way back to 10,000 before Christ, people have come and gone. Waves after wave of people come and go through Europe. It's like a revolving, yeah, it's like waves of people come, then another wave behind them, and another wave, and another wave. And every time somebody takes over, they transform the polity into their image. So, yeah. So, if you peel the onion back, during the Ice Age, Scandinavia was uninhabitable. So it was, in the province of Värmland, where I used to live in Sweden, and there was the area where I lived at, and it was first colonized by humans in 5,000 before Christ. And 5,000 before Christ. So how many different types of people have lived in this region? Where did the Svea come from? Because in Scandinavia there were Svea, there were Goths, Northern Goths, there were all these people, all these different people that came and went. So the Samner in the northern part of Scandinavia also came from somewhere else. So at some point, so you know what I mean? So nobody's native to anything, anywhere. It's that simple. I'm very skeptical about narratives of nativism. And so yeah, nativism, gender, race, as far as I'm concerned, do not exist. All that exists are individuals and interacting with these narratives that society tries to impose on them. And yeah, so yeah, I guess I said everything I had to say. So yeah. Race does not exist, gender does not exist, and there are no natives anywhere on this planet. Okay?